I recently came across this 2-minute promotional video for an upcoming conservative Christian apologetics conference on social media. And I thought that it just encapsulated so many of the problems and the ironies with conservative Christian apologetics. So I want to watch it. We'll kind of look at it in three parts because it kind of breaks down into three parts, and I'm going to debrief each part. So we'll just begin by taking a look at the first part. Let's go.
What is distinctive about the Christian truth claim? The stakes couldn't be higher. It's our Christian responsibility to understand that discipleship and faithfulness to Christ means we're called to a consistency of thought and life and obedience to Christ under the Word of God.
Okay, let's first of all debrief that. Now, the first thing to note is that the video was well produced, with inspiring, swelling music that is going to pull you in and I think affect you emotionally and probably make you want to come to the apologetics conference. It gives an air of gravitas, of importance, of moral authority. All of that, I think, is conveyed by the sobriety as well. All of that is conveyed by the video and the way that it's presented. The first thing I want to highlight, however, in this first excerpt is that it begins by saying, in a culture where all worldviews are equal. And then it juxtaposes that with Al Mohler saying that within Christianity, we follow Jesus Christ and seek to be obedient to him. And I don't have any objection to the clip per se that of Al Mohler saying that. My problem is the juxtaposition of this statement of basic Christian conviction and juxtaposing that with this initial assertion that in the wider culture, which presumably here is referring to a contemporary American culture, that this is a culture in which, quote, all worldviews are equal. Now, it's not entirely clear what that means, but I think from the context, it's probably is pretty clear. What it means is that the culture is radically relativistic, so that it doesn't matter what you believe because all worldviews are equal. They're all equally true. And this is juxtaposed with the Christian. It's contrasted with the Christian who believes, no, truth is uniquely found in Jesus Christ and our fidelity to him. And the first point I want to make is that this is just an absolutely absurd claim to make about contemporary culture. The contemporary culture is not defined at all by the assumption that all worldviews are equal. On the contrary, today the world is increasingly polarized because people fundamentally disagree with one another over the nature of reality, so fundamentally often that they cannot even have a conversation or be with another person of a differing perspective in the same room. Consider, for example, the way that Republicans and Democrats in the highly polarized social and political landscape of contemporary American society, they have often contempt for each other. They cannot even understand where the other could be coming from. Think about how Democrats, for example, they support elective abortion access. Republicans widely denounce this as is not only the murder of infants, but often I hear Republicans talking about this as equivalent to the sacrifice of children to Moloch or a contemporary Holocaust. But the Democrats, on the other hand, believe that the repeal of rights of access to abortion is the removal of an objective human right that was once possessed by women, and it is an oppression, and it is objectively wrong. And these two groups are just at polar opposites from one another. Or consider the fact that QAnon has exploded in contemporary American society, and there are many people who follow this absolutely bizarre conspiracy theory, and they adamantly believe that Democrats and Hollywood elites and Jewish bankers are all evil and corrupt, and that they are part of an international pedophile ring, and that Donald Trump and whoever else is going to come in his wake have been raised up to fight against these forces of evil. And these people adamantly believe that. I mean, across the landscape, people all have deeply passionate beliefs, and they fight for that which they believe to be true. Again, even to the point of such deep polarization that society threatens to fracture at the very seams. One thing that is certainly the case is that it is not true, not at all true, that people widely assume that, quote, all worldviews are equal. So here's the great irony then, that this apologetics teaser video, which is meant to promote an upcoming conference on truth, begins by predicating the whole basis for the conference on an objectively, manifestly, obviously false claim about contemporary society. Okay, well, let's go to part 2.
In the atheist worldview, it started with nothing or mass energy or something. And everything else, including mind, is derivative. In the Christian worldview, it's the exact opposite. Mind is the ultimate reality, the mind of God. And mass energy and physics and chemistry and everything else is derivative. It's that worldview that makes infinitely more sense to me.
Okay, once again, let's debrief. Now, the first thing that the second part says is, it says, creation no longer bows to the creator. I'm not sure initially, like, what are they talking about? Because, of course, from a Christian perspective, there was this thing called the cosmic fall. And ever since the cosmic fall, human beings are sinful and creation groans. And ever since that time, creation has not bowed to the creator. So why say this now? What changed that would lead this video to think this is now something worth note, which would predicate the need for this conference or undergird the need for the conference? Well, then it becomes clearer what the video is suggesting by saying creation no longer bows to the creator, because it shows a clip of John Lennox speaking. And when he speaks, he talks about atheism, of course. So the implication here is that creation now no longer bows to the creator because of atheism, because atheists do not believe that there is a creator and thus do not bow to the creator, and thus because now atheists are permitted to exist, I don't know, they're out there in society, in the world, sharing their views, that in virtue of that, creation no longer bows to the creator. Now, again, this is kind of crazy, because from a Christian perspective, the issue is not atheists, the issue is the fall, right? And yes, if insofar as creation doesn't bow to the creator, it's because of the fall, and it's been that way since the beginning, right? Since protology and Genesis chapter 3. But that's not going to sell the conference, because what you need is the imposition of a sort of crisis, a new crisis where society is becoming increasingly wayward and now is not bowing. And what you need to do then is you need to introduce a villain into this crisis situation, the villain that is fomenting the crisis. And the villain is not the sin nature that lies within every human being. No, on this account, that villain is the atheist. So once again, atheists are pulled up as, in a sense, the whipping boy, the foil, as it were, to justify the conference. And then consider the content of the clip that John Lennox gives us. Now, in one sense, I'm sympathetic with what John Lennox says. He says very simply that in atheism, everything comes from matter, non-mind, whereas in Christian theism, everything comes from mind. And I mean, generally speaking, that's a fair point to make. However, he goes on then to say that as a result, we can say that these two worldviews, well, atheism is not really a worldview, right? Atheism is simply the denial of belief in God, but naturalism is a worldview. So for simplicity's sake, let's just slot in naturalism where John Lennox says atheism. And as an aside, it's pretty clear why John Lennox doesn't use the word naturalism, why he uses the word atheism, because it's a trigger word, right? And certainly in terms of advertising and creating enemies, atheist is going to trigger people, going to trigger conservative Christians in a way that naturalist just doesn't. So they use the term atheist, even though the term naturalist as a worldview would be a more appropriate term. But you've now juxtaposed these two different worldviews, Christianity and naturalism, and you claim that there's never the twain shall meet, and there's nothing that they share with one another. And so he says they are the exact opposite of one another. So anything that is bright and light on the one side is darkness on the other side, and vice versa. If it's good on one side, it's evil on the other side. This is the creation of a binary opposition. So in the first clip we saw, the video creates this faux sense of crisis in the contemporary culture by falsely claiming that people are all radical relativists outside of the Christian belief system. Everybody else, I mean, is that Jews, is that Muslims, as well as that Mormons, as well as naturalists, atheists, secularists, they're all radical relativists. Absolutely false. But then it goes on, and then it begins to lay the foundation for this absolute binary opposition between the bad guys, who are now called atheists, and the good guys, who are called Christians. And as Lennox says, there's no overlap between the two. Now, the approach in my book, The Doubter's Creed, could not be further from that, because in The Doubter's Creed, I show that, in fact, the continuum from theism to atheism is not a binary. It's not either you're a theist or you're an atheist. There are various different conceptions of the absolute, of the transcendent, of the real, of that than which none greater can be conceived. And they exist on a continuum from increasingly personal and anthropomorphic to decreasingly personal and anthropomorphic. And some of those on the one end are radically anthropomorphized. Let's say Mormonism. Mormonism's conception of deity is like really just a human being who's achieved an exalted status. But then some forms of Christian theism are increasingly abstract and separate from personal categories, such as some versions of classical theism. And then eventually you get to some versions of atheistic transcendent conceptions of God, like in panentheism, such as the views that were held by Albert Einstein, which I talk about in the book. It's not a binary. And once you recognize that it's not a binary, you can't simply say, oh, it's just mind or matter, and these views are as different from one another as you could possibly imagine. That is not true. There is, in fact, a lot of overlap between various different conceptions, metaphysical conceptions of atheism and Christian theism. So at that point as well, we would need to challenge. But of course, that kind of nuance in a promotional video is not going to get people to buy tickets for your apologetics conference. And we now come to the last clip.
So have you ever stopped and wondered, why is truth even important? Who cares? Why should you and I care about truth? The Bible says in the beginning God created. There's a purpose for marriage, purpose for family, and it's when we know that purpose and that truth and we orient our lives around that truth that we're set free. That's why Jesus said, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Lies bring slavery. Truth brings freedom.
Okay, now for the final clip. So here the statement is, truth remains constant. So that's just kind of underscoring this idea that Christians are committed to objective truth. One of the problems I want to point out about that kind of language is that while truth can remain constant, our understanding of truth is always fallible and open to revision. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And so sometimes when people are growing in their understanding of truth and other people want to challenge them as being relativists, they're conflating categories between truth and epistemology or knowledge. Another thing is truth, the statement truth remains constant is really kind of a slogan with questionable content, because it's not clear, again, what that means. There are many statements that are time indexed, right? They're true for a time and then they're no longer true. For example, it is sunny today is true today, but when that is spoken tomorrow, when it's cloudy, it won't be true tomorrow. So just saying truth remains constant is not necessarily an illuminating statement to make. Now, in terms of the clip from Sean McDowell gives several examples of how different views of different truth claims and different institutions, such as the family, are all, from his perspective or a Christian perspective, rooted in a particular understanding of Christian reality, and that's all truth. But then note the key statement he makes at the end: lies bring slavery, truth brings freedom. Now, what this does at the conclusion of this video is it simply underscores this absolute binary opposition that this promotional video has made between a radically relativistic world where atheists refuse to submit to God and truth versus a Christian world, which is a world of light and freedom. The world out there of the atheists and all the radical relativists is a world of slavery and darkness. But the world here, the world that is offered by the conference to which you should buy a ticket and come, brings truth and light and freedom. Now, this is it's a promotional video. They want to say things to get you to come to the conference. And in that way, like most promotional videos or advertising, it's to a degree manipulative. And maybe you can kind of forgive the manipulation in the video to a degree, because that's what videos are to do, right? Of this kind, these promotional are meant to get you to want to come. However, it is again deeply problematic that this is ostensibly a conference that is concerned with truth. I mean, this is the main theme, is that Christians are concerned with objective truth, which is constant. But yet, from the very beginning, it makes false, manifestly, baldly false statements about the wider culture, claiming everybody is relativistic, and then straw-manning atheists and suggesting there's some new degree of rebellion in the world because of atheists who are refusing to submit to God, and then suggesting that there's just this absolute binary opposition between the Christian insiders who have truth and freedom and light, and everybody out there in the world who's not a Christian and part of our group who has darkness and slavery. This, ironically, this kind of language of creating, identifying a foil, an other, someone that you can objectify and otherize, and then creating a sharp binary opposition between the in-group, who has all the truth and light and freedom and goodness, and the out-group, the enemy, who has all the darkness and slavery and lies. This is itself the very framework in which one effectively indoctrinates people, not equipping them to understand truth and to pursue truth and seek truth and dialogue with the other in this highly polarized world in which we live, but rather in which one dehumanizes and objectifies and distrusts the other because they've been given these indoctrinating binary categories. Sadly, this video, I don't think, is a one-off. And that's, again, why I took the time to deconstruct it and analyze it, because I think this kind of advertising and the mindset that it represents is so part and parcel of mainstream conservative Christian apologetics today, which to my mind means that so much of that apologetic quote unquote ministry is actually deeply harmful and malformative for Christian discipleship.